comes to movies, they have their different opinions. Is it good, bad, or just okay? And then comes the underrated films, where they're treated unfairly and aren't as bad as people say they are. So, after I've seen several films in my time, I've made a small list of films that I feel that are underrated and not given the respect they deserve. So it's time to start the top 5 underrated films. Number 5, Ghostbusters 2. This is a pretty common underrated film in general. Ghostbusters 2 is a sequel to the classic Ghostbusters, and it picks up 5 years after the team defeated Gozer and saved New York City, but they later go out of business after being sued for massive property damage. The team go their separate ways trying to find new jobs, but when a new threat named Vigo comes to plan on possessing a body and destroy the world, the Ghostbusters are rehired to stop the new threat. It's nice to see all the Ghostbusters back in action, as each of them still have the same charm and appeal they had from the first film. It had some cool scenes like the River of Slime, the Statue of Liberty coming to life by a NES Advantage controller, and a whole bunch of other stuff. I also like the scene near the end where Lewis decides to help the Ghostbusters and slaps on a proton pack and off he goes. The sequel may not be a masterpiece and it's not better than the first, but it's still a good film in general. Number 4, Anastasia. During Don Bluth's time in films, he made some wonderful and creative films back in the 1980s. But when the 1990s came around, he was reduced to making mediocre and lame films, and I think Anastasia isn't any of those. The story takes place in Russia, where a young girl named Anna is trying to discover her past while her friend Puka helps her out. She later meets Dmitri and Vladimir, who believe she's the lost princess Anastasia, so the two help her out while being chased by Rasputin, who wants revenge on the Romanovs' surviving heir, which is Anastasia. This film has wonderful animation, great voice actors, and some cool songs that are pretty good, mostly Once Upon a December and In the Dark of the Night. The characters are nice since Puka and Bartok seem more of the scene stealers. Rasputin is pretty interesting since he's voiced by Christopher Lloyd, and I'm sure parents think the character is not suitable for children since there are times when Rasputin's parts would pop off after being dead for a long time. But I don't think that's very violent. It would only seem violent as if blood was shooting out of the limbs that were popping off of him. It seems like the people that hate this film are historians of Russia, and I have to admit that is one sore spot the film had. But other than that, it's a decent film. But if you don't like this film, then I'm fine with that. At least it's 10 times better than A Troll in Central Park. Number 3, Robin Hood, Men in Tights. This film is another one of those films that has received mixed opinions from people. The film is a spoof of Robin Hood with the artistic comedy work of Mel Brooks, who has been well known for making Young Frankenstein, Spaceballs, and his most famous film, Blazing Saddles. The action scenes are pretty cool and funny. Some of the jokes are pretty funny, especially mentioning Mel Brooks' other films. One of my favorite scenes is when Robin and the gang break the fourth wall in the archery tournament. Good old fourth wall gags. Of course, as usual, Mel plays a character in his own film, and it's also interesting to see Robert Ridley reprise the Hangman character who was seen in Blazing Saddles. Even though it didn't do so well at the box office and some of the jokes seem a little overused, it's still a decent film, and I say it's worth a watch. Especially if you're a Mel Brooks fan like I am. Number 2, Tron Legacy. I never thought there would be a sequel to the movie Tron, and after the sequel was made, it seems like it's being brutally bashed by many people. The film takes place a couple of years after the events of the first Tron film, where Kevin Flynn's son, Sam, is trying to find his father after he mysteriously disappeared. He later discovers Flynn's old arcade building and finds a room that teleports him to the gaming world where programs live. I really enjoyed seeing all the locations from the first film into the sequel, whether it was Encom, Flynn's arcade, or the grid. They almost looked the way I remembered them from the first film. It was also nice seeing some upgrades of the identity disc, the light cycles, the recognizers, and even the solar sailor. And I think it's also cool that even the original light cycle makes an appearance, which is a nice piece of nostalgia and trivia at the same time. Some of the actors from the first film are back reprising their roles after a long time. I also like the fact that Clue is given a bigger role. In the first film, he was a program created by Flynn to try and stop the MCP, but he later gets captured and is de-rezzed immediately. In the sequel, Flynn recreates Clue as his right-hand man to help control the data world, but he later turns against him and takes control. People complain about the actors, and I'll have to admit there are a few moments when the actors go a little over the top, but not much. It seems like people who bash on it are most of the fanboys of the first Tron film who don't like change and all that crap. But besides that, Tron Legacy was a great film and it deserves a second chance. It took Disney almost 30 years to make a sequel to Tron, and after all that hard work, I say it was well worth the wait. Number 1. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the 2005 film. A story about a young boy who gets the chance of a lifetime to explore an amazing chocolate factory. Now, this one is pretty interesting because even though the film was a box office success, it got a lot of positive reviews and all that. It just seems like there's so many people that have a flaming hatred for this film just because it's nothing like the original, yada yada yada. Yeah, I get real tired of hearing people bashing the living daylights out of the 2005 film, and their only complaint is, it's nothing like the original. The end. Now, when the original film came out, I'm sure there was at least 70% of people who never bothered reading the book and just pushed it aside like garbage. Of course, if they did their research more, they would found out that the new one is actually closer to the book and didn't go all over the place like the original Wonka film did. But they made sure that the new Wonka film didn't end up going word for word, otherwise it would have been similar to Timothy Hines' version of War of the Worlds. The film was great and they got the name right. I never did understand why they called it Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory in the original. I think it had to do something with them trying to advertise the chocolate bar in real life, but I can't remember. Now, I am a big fan of Tim Burton, and when I heard he was doing the film, I had some doubts, but when I saw the film, all the doubts faded away. Now, I do like the original, but of course there are a few times where it just seems odd and tends to stay away from the source, like the giant geese scene. That wasn't even in the book. I guess they did this because the technology wasn't that advanced to do the nut room scene with all the squirrels and such. But despite all the small nitpicking comparing the 2005 film to the book, the only big difference is that we get to learn Wonka's past, and I thought that was pretty cool. We know Wonka was a candy-making genius and all that, but we never learned what inspired him to do this. But besides that, the 2005 film was pretty cool, even though people unfairly bash it like the Nostalgia Critic. Now don't get me wrong, I like the Nostalgia Critic and his work, but his old versus new of Wonka was my least favorite episode. It just seems like he was worshipping the original and attacking the new one. Of course, he mentions that he never read the book, so it's understandable. I still find it interesting there are people who enjoyed the original better, even though Roald Dahl, the author of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and the others, was very disappointed in the original film, and I quote, "He thought it placed too much emphasis on Willy Wonka and not enough on Charlie, and was very outraged when the film was nothing like his work. After this, Dahl pretty much refused to allow his sequel, Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator, to be made into a film. Yeah, in short, I like both films, but I prefer the new one, and if Roald Dahl was still around, I'm sure he might have enjoyed seeing the 2005 film, as it follows his work very good. Well, that ends this list, and if you like those films that I mentioned, then that's good to hear. And if you don't like any of those films that I mentioned, then I'm fine with that. Well, that wraps up this video, so this is Melting Man 234 signing out.